The door slammed so hard the hallway mirror rattled. Sophie's heels clicked against the old wooden floor like a metronome of disapproval. "Mom," she sighed, loud and theatrical, "how can you live like this?" Elaine looked up from the kitchen table, where she'd been folding a dish towel that didn't really need folding. Her daughter stood in the doorway like an inspector, one manicured eyebrow arched, one hand on her hip. Sophie's expensive perfume cut through the faint scent of lemon cleaner. "I cleaned this morning," Elaine murmured. "This," Sophie gestured broadly, the mail piled near the phone, the teacup left on the counter, a sweater draped across a chair. "This isn't clean, this is chaos. It smells like old memories in here." Elaine's fingers tightened on the dish towel. There was no use arguing. Sophie was like her father that way, needing to be right, needing order, needing control. Sophie moved briskly, opening cupboards, rearranging plates, muttering under her breath. "You really shouldn't be living alone. You let everything go. You used to be so." "So what?" Elaine asked quietly. Sophie froze, caught between irritation and guilt. "So lively," she said at last, but her tone made the word sound like an accusation. Elaine turned away, letting the insult hang in the air. Her daughter's voice had grown harder in the years since Mark's death, brisk, managerial, as if emotion were an inconvenience. "All right," Sophie announced, clapping her hands once. "I'll start in the kitchen. First things first, that freezer is disgusting. You don't even use half the food in there." Elaine's head snapped up. "Leave it," she said too fast. Sophie gave her a strange look. "Why, is there a raccoon in there or something?" She laughed at her own joke and crossed the room. Elaine's pulse thudded in her throat. "Sophie, please." But Sophie was already reaching for the handle, humming under her breath. The hum stopped the instant she yanked the door open. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Frost drifted from the shelves like breath in winter air. Elaine's hands trembled. Sophie turned slowly. "Mom, what is this?" Elaine's face went pale. The hum of the freezer filled the silence and nothing else moved. Elaine pressed her palms against the counter to steady herself. The cold hum of the freezer filled the silence like a low, mechanical sigh. Sophie stood in front of it, arms folded, the frost still clinging to her sleeves. "For heaven's sake, Mom," she said finally. "This is insane, half this stuff looks ancient. Why are you keeping it?" Elaine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, too private to release. Instead, she reached for a dishcloth and began wiping an already clean surface. "Mom," Sophie said sharply, "look at me." Elaine turned slowly. Her daughter's face, once soft, once full of laughter, had hardened into something else. Efficiency, judgment, distance. The little girl who used to fall asleep in her lap was gone, replaced by a woman who sounded like every voice that had ever made Elaine feel small. "You can't keep living like this," Sophie continued, her tone clipped. "You don't cook, you don't go out. You just sit here in this mausoleum of a house surrounded by old junk and bad memories." Elaine swallowed. Living like a ghost, she thought. That's what she'd become, quiet, half visible, taking up space but not attention. Sophie sighed and turned her back, rummaging through the freezer. "I mean, what even is this?" she muttered, holding up a frostbitten casserole. "Do you realize how unhealthy it is to cling to the past like this?" Elaine's hands trembled again. She pressed them flat against her skirt, willing the shaking to stop. In her mind, the room blurred, replaced by another kitchen years ago. Mark stood at the same counter, tall and smiling, pulling Sophie into his arms while Elaine watched from the doorway, content just to see them happy. Then came the funeral. Sophie in black, chin lifted, her eyes too dry. The weeks that followed were a blur of casseroles from neighbors, awkward condolences and silence. When Sophie finally spoke again, it was to tell Elaine she'd take care of everything. She did the bills, the house, the decisions. The daughter became the caretaker. And somewhere along the way, she started speaking to Elaine like she was a child. Elaine blinked the memory away. Sophie was still talking, still scolding. "I'm serious," Sophie said. "This freezer is a health hazard. Tomorrow I'm clearing it out. I'll toss whatever's expired and we'll start fresh." Elaine managed a small smile. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart." Sophie frowned, mistaking gentleness for weakness. "I do. You can't just keep pretending everything's fine." Elaine's heart ached. Pretending was how she'd survived, one day at a time, keeping what little warmth remained sealed away in the one place Sophie never looked. Until now. When Sophie left the kitchen to take a phone call, Elaine exhaled shakily. The walls seemed to close in, heavy with unspoken words. She moved toward the freezer, her fingertips brushing the frosted handle. Her reflection in the chrome surface looked older than she remembered, smaller too. "I raised her to be strong," she whispered, "not heartless." Outside the kitchen, Sophie's voice drifted in from the hallway, calm, professional, detached. She was already moving on to some work crisis, already in charge of another world. Elaine closed the freezer door carefully, like tucking away a secret. From the hallway came Sophie's parting words. "Tomorrow, Mom, that freezer's getting cleaned out whether you like it or not." Elaine stared at the door, her eyes glinting with something new, not fear this time but resolve. "Over my dead body," she said softly. The freezer hummed in reply as if it had heard her. Before the silence settled into her home like dust, there had been laughter, bright, careless laughter that filled every room. Elaine could still hear it sometimes, echoing faintly through the walls when she was alone. It was Mark's voice. He had been the kind of man people liked instantly, confident, witty, the life of every gathering. When they met, Elaine was 22, shy, deliberate, the quiet girl who preferred corners to crowds. He'd called her his calm in a chaotic world. Back then, she believed him. Marriage had polished him but also hardened him. He became a man who needed admiration the way others needed air. At first, Elaine provided it gladly. Then Sophie was born and her praise shifted, all of it for the little girl with her father's blue eyes and quick charm. Mark adored Sophie. He'd swing her in the air after work, kiss her forehead, buy her tiny dresses that made her feel like a princess. Elaine would watch them from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling with pride and something heavier, a quiet ache she couldn't name. Sometimes Mark's voice would change when he spoke to her, softer for Sophie, sharper for Elaine. "You worry too much," he'd say. "You always make things heavy." Elaine learned to smile through the sting. It was easier to keep the peace, easier to be invisible. Years slipped by that way, Sophie's school plays, Mark's business trips, birthdays that grew quieter as he grew busier. Elaine began to sense there were parts of his life she never saw, shadows that smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, but she never asked. She told herself she didn't need to know. Then one ordinary morning Mark didn't come home. A heart attack, the doctor said, sudden, merciless. He'd been found in his car, parked outside an unfamiliar street. Elaine didn't ask questions then either. Grief was louder than suspicion. Sophie clung to her, sobbing, and Elaine decided the truth would serve no one. After the funeral, the house filled with flowers and silence. Sophie went back to college, and Elaine wandered through rooms that felt too large for her. One day, while sorting through Mark's desk, she found a small envelope tucked inside an old book. The handwriting on it stopped her breath. "For Sophie, if I never get the chance to explain." Her hands trembled as she turned it over. She didn't open it right away, not until night when the house was dark. The letter was simple, written in Mark's looping hand. It began with love, then confession. He spoke of mistakes, of a woman he'd been seeing for years, of a child who might be his. He begged for forgiveness, for Sophie to remember him kindly, for Elaine to protect her from the truth if she could. Elaine read it once, twice, then folded it neatly. Her first instinct was to burn it, to let the words vanish with the smoke. But she couldn't. Some part of her needed to keep it safe, as though destroying it would destroy the last proof that her marriage, imperfect as it was, had been real. She placed the letter in a plastic sleeve, wrapped it in a towel, and opened the freezer. Inside were Mark's favorite meals, the casseroles she'd made in the weeks before he died. She slid the letter between them, behind a stack of frozen lasagnas, and closed the door gently. The hum of the motor sounded almost like a heartbeat. Years passed. Sophie grew into a mirror of her father, brilliant, opinionated, always certain. Elaine watched her build a life from ambition, not affection. Every visit felt colder than the last, every conversation another reminder of how alike Sophie and Mark were both allergic to weakness. Now standing in front of that same freezer decades later, Elaine could almost feel the cold seeping through the metal, pressing against her skin like memory. The letter was still there, sealed in ice, untouched, waiting. She thought of Mark's last words in that letter, "Don't let her hate me." And she wondered, not for the first time, if keeping his secret had saved Sophie, or frozen her heart right alongside his. From the living room she heard Sophie's voice again, sharp, impatient, alive. Elaine closed her eyes, her throat tight. The past was buried in frost and lies, but tomorrow, when Sophie opened that freezer again, everything would thaw. The hum of the appliance deepened, almost like a warning. Morning arrived heavy, the air thick with unspoken dread. Elaine could tell from the rhythm of Sophie's footsteps that she had made up her mind, that fast, determined click of heels down the hallway that always preceded some declaration of authority. Sophie appeared in the doorway, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. "Today," she said, clapping her hands once, "we're cleaning this place properly, starting with that freezer." Elaine's stomach tightened. "It's fine, Sophie, I'll take care of it later." "You've been saying that for years," Sophie shot back, already moving toward the kitchen. "God knows what's growing in there, it's a health hazard." Elaine followed, heart pounding. She wanted to protest, to beg, to invent any excuse that might sound reasonable, but her words tangled behind her teeth. She stood in the doorway, helpless, as Sophie opened the freezer door and began unloading its contents. Frozen lasagna, stew, neatly wrapped leftovers from a time when cooking had meant love, not loneliness. Sophie set each item on the counter with surgical precision, sighing dramatically. "Mom, half this stuff looks prehistoric," she forced a laugh. "Honestly, it's sad, you shouldn't be living like this." Elaine's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not sad, it's memory." Sophie didn't hear her, or maybe she chose not to. Container by container, layer by layer, she dismantled the years. Beneath the newer items lay older ones, carefully labeled packages with faded ink. Mark's dinner 2009. Mark's soup, Mark's favorite casserole. Sophie froze mid-motion. "You've been keeping Dad's food for 15 years. Elaine's throat tightened. It just felt wrong to throw them away. "That's insane," Sophie snapped. "He's gone, Mom, you can't just live like some relic keeper." Elaine winced. "He was your father." "And you're not him," Sophie shot back, voice sharp enough to cut. "You're still here, acting like you died with him, it's pathetic." The words hit like a slap. Elaine turned away, gripping the counter for balance. Sophie's voice softened a little, though it carried no warmth. "I'm sorry, but someone has to take care of you. You clearly can't do it yourself." She reached deep into the freezer again and then stopped. Her fingers brushed something that wasn't food. "What's this?" Elaine's head jerked up. Sophie tugged out a small bundle wrapped in an old towel, frosted white along the edges. She frowned. "Seriously, you've been freezing towels too." Elaine moved forward fast, faster than she had in years. "Don't touch that." Sophie blinked, startled by the sudden urgency. "What is it?" "Please, Sophie, just leave it be." "Why, what is it?" Elaine reached out, her hands trembling. "It's nothing that concerns you." Sophie stepped back, clutching the towel tighter. "You're shaking. What's inside, Mom?" Elaine's breath came shallow. "Please." For a moment they stood locked in silence, mother and daughter, mirror images of defiance. Then Sophie ripped the towel away. The envelope was brittle from cold, the ink slightly blurred but legible. "For Sophie, if I never get the chance to explain." Sophie frowned. "This is Dad's handwriting." Elaine's voice cracked. "Give it to me." But Sophie was already shaking her head. "What could possibly be so important that you'd hide it for 15 years? Her tone rose, disbelief, anger, betrayal. "Did you think I couldn't handle whatever it is? Did you think I was a child?" Elaine stepped forward again, desperate. "Some truths don't heal, Sophie, they destroy." "Maybe it's not your choice to decide that," Sophie snapped. "I have a right to know." She tore the seal open. "No," Elaine's voice broke the room in half, louder than she'd ever heard herself. But the sound came too late. Sophie unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the first lines, the endearments, the apologies. Then her expression shifted, confusion bleeding into disbelief. She read faster, her lips parted. Then she stopped, staring at the page as if it were written in fire. "He had another woman," her voice was hollow, "a child." Elaine's eyes filled. "He made mistakes, Sophie, terrible ones, but he loved you." Sophie looked up slowly, her face pale, trembling. "You knew, all these years you knew." "I was trying to protect you." "From what? From knowing my father was a liar, or from knowing you were?" Elaine flinched. "I didn't lie, I just—" "You hid him," Sophie cut in, voice shaking now. "You kept this secret and let me worship him. You let me build my entire life around a ghost." Tears slid down Elaine's cheeks. "You needed to believe in something, you needed strength." Sophie laughed bitterly, clutching the letter. "Strength? You mean delusion. You turn me into him and you hate that, don't you? You hate that I remind you of the man who betrayed you." Elaine took a step forward, trembling but steady. No, Sophie, I hate that you learned his cruelty, not his love. The room went silent. The hum of the freezer filled the space between them, a low, relentless drone. Sophie's face crumpled. For a second her anger faltered. You should have told me. I was afraid, Elaine whispered. Afraid of losing you too. Sophie stared at her, eyes glistening but hard. You lost me anyway. She dropped the letter on the counter and stormed out, the slam of the door rattling the kitchen cabinets. Elaine stood still, surrounded by half-melted memories, the food, the towel, the open freezer humming like an open wound. Her hands stopped shaking, her tears slowed. Something inside her, something long buried, began to shift. For years she had been silent, small, safe in her invisibility, but safety had cost her everything. She turned to the open door where Sophie had vanished, her voice steady now, almost cold. She decided she wouldn't be invisible anymore. Elaine didn't chase her daughter. The front door slammed, and the echo rolled through the house like thunder fading into quiet rain. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like space. She stood there for a while, the open freezer still humming behind her, the letter trembling on the counter. The paper looked so small, so powerless now. For 15 years it had ruled her life, a frozen monument to guilt, to fear, to love that had rotted under ice. Elaine reached out and folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. Her hands didn't shake this time. Then she began to move. Not in panic, not in shame, but with a steady, deliberate rhythm. She started cleaning, but not the way Sophie did, no scolding, no checklist, no judgment. She cleared one counter, then another, humming faintly to herself. Dust floated in the sunlight like ghosts finally being invited to leave. Each movement felt like an act of reclaiming. She threw away the containers labeled with her husband's name, one by one. Goodbye, Mark, she whispered, not in bitterness but release. You've taken enough space. The rhythm of cleaning became something deeper, a ritual of resurrection. Elaine opened windows, let in the cold air, stripped the old curtains. She made herself tea in the chipped mug Sophie had mocked earlier that week. She sat at the kitchen table, her table, and stared out at the yard where her daughter used to play in the sprinklers, laughter spilling through open windows. For years she had tried to keep that image alive, a perfect daughter, a perfect family, a perfect silence. But perfection had been her prison. Now she understood, she wasn't weak for enduring, she had survived. Her reflection in the window looked different, still soft but not small. She whispered to the empty room, if love froze me, truth will thaw me. That line hung in the air, both confession and promise. She began to cook, not to please anyone, not to prove anything, just to feel alive. The smell of onions and rosemary filled the air, and the home began to smell like life again. Later she sat down at her writing desk, the one Sophie had called cluttered nonsense, and pulled out a blank piece of paper. Her pen hovered for a long moment before the words came, slow but steady. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, it means you've seen the truth. I'm sorry for hiding it, but I won't apologize for protecting you. The man you loved was flawed, but so am I, we both are. What matters is what we do with what we know now. She paused, exhaling deeply. She didn't need to finish the letter, not yet. Maybe Sophie would never read it. Maybe the act of writing it was enough. That night Elaine slept with the windows open. She dreamt not of her husband nor of Sophie's anger, but of the sound of laughter, hers, young and unburdened. When morning light broke, she didn't dread the day. She stood at the mirror, brushed her silver hair, and caught herself smiling, small, hesitant but real. Then she noticed the freezer, cleaned, empty, humming quietly in the corner. The letter was gone. Sophie had taken it when she left. Elaine felt no panic. For the first time she wasn't afraid of what her daughter would think. She only whispered, let the truth do what I couldn't. Because this wasn't revenge, this was revelation. And as the sun rose higher, Elaine began planning, not to defend herself, not to beg forgiveness, but to finally live in her own home, her own skin, her own story. It was late afternoon when Elaine heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires made her body stiffen instinctively, a habit she thought she'd finally shed. The knock came hard and fast, more of a command than a request. Elaine didn't move right away. She wiped her hands slowly on her apron, heart steady. The stew on the stove simmered gently, filling the kitchen with warmth and quiet defiance. When she opened the door, Sophie stood there, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, holding the creased letter in her hand like evidence in a trial. "Can I come in?" Elaine nodded once, of course. Sophie stepped inside, her gaze darting around as though the house itself had betrayed her. "I've been thinking about this," she said, waving the letter. "About everything, and I still don't understand how you could hide it from me." Elaine shut the door softly. "Sit, Sophie." "I don't want to sit." "Then stand," Elaine said, turning back to the stove. "But you'll listen." That tone, calm, measured, absolute, caught Sophie off guard. It wasn't the voice of the mother she'd scolded and dismissed for years. Elaine stirred the pot slowly, the wooden spoon scraping against the pan. "You think I lied to you," she said, "but what I did was love you the only way I knew how." "Love," Sophie's voice cracked. "You call this love, letting me grow up worshipping a man who betrayed us both?" Elaine set the spoon down, turned, and met her daughter's eyes. "Yes," she said quietly, "because you were a child, and children need heroes, even broken ones." Sophie blinked, her anger momentarily faltering. "You should have told me." "You were 16, Elaine said. "Angry at the world, angry at me, and I had just buried your father. I couldn't take away the last piece of him you still loved." Silence, only the soft hiss of boiling stew. Sophie crossed her arms, her voice trembling. "You always make excuses, you hide behind being the victim." Elaine's expression didn't change. "You call it weakness," she said, stepping closer. "I call it surviving." The words landed heavy between them. "For 20 years, I smiled through every insult, every slammed door, every time you told me how disappointed you were. I let you think I was small because it made you feel strong. Because I thought that's what mothers do, they carry the blame so their children can walk taller." Sophie's lips parted, but no sound came. Elaine continued, her voice steady, almost detached. "But here's the truth, Sophie. I didn't just protect you from his sins, I protected you from mine, from the bitterness that could have eaten you alive if I'd let it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "I thought silence was mercy. I see now it was cowardice. But it was my choice, and I will not apologize for loving you imperfectly." The kitchen fell utterly still. Even the simmering pot seemed to quiet, as if listening. Sophie's eyes shimmered. "You kept me in a lie, Mom. You made me the version of him you hated." Elaine nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "Because you were strong where I was, you had his confidence, his fire. I wanted to believe that meant you, never be broken the way I was. But I see now you inherited his pride too, the part that couldn't forgive." Sophie's voice cracked into something softer. "Do you hate me?" Elaine shook her head. "Never, but I hate the way we stopped seeing each other. You looked at me and saw weakness. I looked at you and saw his ghost." A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. "He wasn't a hero, was he?" "No," Elaine said gently. "He was just a man who wanted to be loved by everyone and ended up deserving no one." Sophie sank into a chair at last. "Why'd you keep the letter?" Elaine smiled faintly. "Because I couldn't let it die with him. It was proof not of his betrayal, but of how much of myself I'd given away. Freezing it was my way of keeping control over something I'd lost." Sophie looked down at the folded paper. "It's like it froze us both." "Yes," Elaine said, nodding, "but we're thawing now." A long silence followed, the kind that wasn't cruel this time, just raw and real. Finally, Sophie spoke, voice trembling. "I read the whole thing. He said he loved you even at the end." Elaine's gaze softened. "He did, in his way, but love without truth isn't love, Sophie, it's performance." Sophie swallowed hard. "Maybe that's what I've been doing, performing strength." Elaine reached across the table, her hand resting gently over Sophie's. For a heartbeat, Sophie didn't move. Then her fingers curled back, tentative but sincere. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Elaine said softly. "I'm asking for honesty from both of us." Sophie's voice broke. "I don't know how." "You start small," Elaine said. "You sit, you eat, you stay." The air shifted, fragile, like glass warming under sunlight. Sophie looked around the kitchen, noticing things she hadn't before, the clean counters, the open windows, the smell of fresh herbs. The house didn't feel old anymore, it felt alive. "You cleaned," she murmured. Elaine nodded, "My way." Sophie's laugh was small but real. "It smells good." "Thank you," Elaine said. Another pause. Sophie took a deep breath. "I thought I was helping you all these years. I didn't realize I was punishing you for not being who I needed." Elaine smiled faintly. And I let you because I thought that's what love looked like. Maybe we were both wrong. Sophie's tears finally fell, silent, steady. I don't know where to start. Here, Elaine said simply, right here. She ladled soup into 2 bowls, steam curling like forgiveness between them. Sophie hesitated, then picked up a spoon. They ate in silence, not the cold silence of resentment, but the tender kind that follows truth. After a while, Sophie spoke quietly. I don't know if I can forgive him. You don't have to, Elaine said. Just don't let him keep deciding who you are. Sophie nodded slowly, eyes wet. Maybe I'd like to stay for dinner. Elaine smiled, her voice soft but certain. You already are. Outside, dusk settled gently over the house. Inside, the hum of the freezer was steady, calm, no longer ominous, just ordinary. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt like home again.
The next morning the house was still. Light spilled softly through the kitchen window, tracing gold over the clutter-free counters. Elaine moved slowly, not from weariness, but from something gentler, peace. Sophie had stayed late the night before, helping to wash dishes in silence. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close, a truce sealed by shared exhaustion. When she finally left, the air didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt open. Elaine made tea and sat by the window, watching the frost melt along the garden fence. The world looked different, clearer somehow. She smiled faintly, remembering the night her daughter used to chase fireflies there. Back then, she'd believed motherhood meant shielding Sophie from every shadow. But now she saw, love wasn't protection, it was presence. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. She opened the door, half expecting the postman, but it was Sophie, hair messy, face bare, clutching a grocery bag. I brought breakfast, she said, awkwardly lifting it. Thought you might not have eaten yet. Elaine blinked in surprise, then stepped aside. Come in. Sophie smiled, small but real. I hope you still like blueberry muffins. I never stopped. The kitchen filled again with movement, hesitant, almost shy. Sophie unpacked the bag while Elaine set the kettle to boil. For a moment neither spoke. The quiet between them felt different now, less like distance, more like breathing room. Sophie finally broke it. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. I kept thinking about the freezer, about everything I said. Elaine didn't turn. You were angry, you had every right to be. Sophie shook her head. No, I was cruel. I thought your house, your habits, were proof you were weak. But I get it now. You weren't living in the past, Mom. You were holding on to it because it was all you had left. Elaine met her eyes. Morning has its own rhythm, she said softly, and sometimes the world mistakes that for madness. Sophie nodded, her voice trembling. I mistook it too. Elaine smiled gently. You're not the first. For a long moment, Sophie said nothing. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter. It was neatly folded, the edges softened from handling. I read it again, she whispered, and I cried this time, not for him, for you. Elaine's breath caught. Sophie continued, voice breaking. You carried his secrets, his guilt, and still managed to raise me. That's not weakness, that's strength I don't think I've ever had. Elaine shook her head. You've got more of it than you know. They sat at the table together, the letter resting between them like a truce. Sophie looked around the kitchen, the open curtains, the cleaned freezer humming quietly in the background. It feels warmer in here, she said. It's the windows, Elaine replied softly. I finally let some light in. Sophie smiled faintly, and I finally saw you in it. The 2 women ate slowly, not filling the silence with apologies or explanations. It wasn't needed. Their grief had already said everything words couldn't. After breakfast, Sophie helped wash the dishes again, but this time they worked side by side, laughter occasionally slipping through the cracks of old hurt. At one point, Sophie paused, looking at her mother's hands, small, lined, steady. You know, she said, I always thought I had to take care of you, but I think you've been taking care of me all along. Elaine's smile was quiet but proud. Maybe now we can just take care of each other. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windowpane, and both turned instinctively toward the sound. The world beyond looked the same, grey sky, bare trees, but it no longer felt cold. Sophie sighed softly. I think I want to start coming by more often, maybe help with the garden this spring. Elaine nodded. That would be nice. They stood in the doorway a while longer when Sophie finally left again, this time not storming out, but stepping into the cold morning with a kind of reverence. She turned back halfway down the path. Mom. Yes, darling. Sophie hesitated, then smiled, not the sharp, guarded smile Elaine had grown used to, but one that reached her eyes. Thank you, for surviving. Elaine's heart swelled. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me. As Sophie drove away, Elaine lingered at the window. The frost had melted completely now, revealing damp earth beneath, life returning slowly, stubbornly. She turned toward the kitchen once more, her home bathed in pale sunlight. The freezer hummed softly, not a tomb anymore, but just a place to keep things until the time was right. Elaine set a fresh bouquet of daisies on the counter. She didn't need frozen memories anymore. She had warmth, she had light. She had herself. It was Sunday afternoon when Sophie came back again, this time without anger, without explanations. She brought groceries, fresh flowers, and a small box of her father's old photographs she'd found tucked away in her own attic. Elaine smiled as she opened the door. You're getting predictable, she teased softly. Better than unbearable, Sophie said, smiling back. They unpacked the groceries together, the rhythm easy, domestic. The house smelled of baking bread and lemon cleaner. For the first time in a long time, it felt lived in, not preserved. When they finished, Sophie glanced toward the freezer. Can I? She asked quietly. Elaine nodded. Go ahead. Sophie opened it slowly, half expecting the old chill of grief to rush out, but instead she found neatly stacked meals, soups, vegetables, a few of Elaine's favorite casseroles, labels in neat handwriting read for Sunday, for rainy days, for Sophie. She smiled, closing the door gently. You filled it again. Elaine shrugged. A freezer, meant to keep things fresh, not hold on to ghosts. They sat down side by side, mugs of tea warming their hands. The quiet that settled between them wasn't awkward now, it was tender, almost sacred. After a while, Sophie spoke, her voice fragile but sincere. I'm sorry for how I treated you, Mom. I thought being strong meant being in control, fixing you, fixing everything. But I think I just didn't know what to do with my grief. Elaine nodded, her eyes soft. None of us do. You can't control grief, Sophie. You can only share it. Sophie exhaled, tears gathering again. You carried so much alone. Elaine smiled faintly. Maybe that's what mothers do, but it's time I let you carry some too, not as a burden but as a bond. Sophie reached for her hand. Then let me. Their fingers intertwined, rough warmth against soft skin, the years between them collapsing into that simple gesture. For a long time they sat there in silence, mother and daughter, equals at last. Elaine looked at her daughter and saw not the echo of Mark, not the reflection of her past mistakes, but her own resilience mirrored back, sharpened by love. Softened by truth. She said quietly, You know, love isn't something we preserve, Sophie. It's something we live, it changes, melts, spills, but that's what keeps it alive. Sophie smiled through her tears. You mean it can't stay frozen forever? Elaine's eyes glimmered. Exactly. When love thaws, it transforms. It becomes something we can hold again. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes on the porch, gentle, melodic. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, touching the edges of the freezer like a quiet blessing. Sophie leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Maybe that's what we are now, thawed. Elaine chuckled softly, a little messy but warm. They both laughed, and the sound was new, not a forced politeness, not a mask, but something genuine. The house no longer carried the echo of loss. It carried the hum of life returning, two women rebuilding not from denial, but from truth. Elaine looked at the clean kitchen, the flowers on the counter, the small letter framed quietly on the shelf, not to be worshipped but remembered. Her heart felt lighter, the ghosts had gone quiet. And for the first time in years, she didn't just feel alive, she felt free. Weeks later, the house was calm again, the kind of quiet that felt earned, not empty. Morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, and the steady hum of the freezer filled the room like a heartbeat. Sophie stood where she'd once shouted, once accused, once believed she knew everything. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, her mother's doing, even in absence. Elaine was in the garden now, tending her roses, her soft humming drifting faintly through the open window. Sophie smiled as she bent down and opened the freezer. Cold air brushed her face, but it didn't sting this time. Inside, everything was orderly, bright with labels, soups, casseroles, stews, small acts of love preserved in plastic and ink. Then she saw it, a single container tucked toward the back, wrapped carefully in foil. The label read in her mother's familiar handwriting. "For when life gets cold again, Mom." Sophie's breath caught. For a moment she just stared at it, tears gathering before she even realized they were falling. She ran her thumb over the words, the ink slightly smudged, proof that even something preserved can carry warmth. She placed the container back gently, closing the freezer with both hands as if sealing a prayer. The hum continued, steady and sure. The kitchen was warm, alive, golden. Sophie turned toward the window, watching her mother in the sunlight. Once this house had been a museum of silence. Now it was a living thing, breathing, forgiving, alive with memory and hope. Sophie whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I get it now." Outside, Elaine looked up from her garden and smiled, as if she'd heard.